Hi, thanks for taking another opportunity to just press pause with us. We're currently in the series Red Letter Renegade, given by Kelly Knouse at the Word of Life Florida Youth Camp in 2019. Yesterday, we looked about Jesus' call to the disciples to follow him, and we asked ourselves to take some time and get away and say, Lord, is there anything that's holding me back from fully following you? I hope you did that. If you haven't had the chance, I encourage you to pause this and go back and watch the first video and then check it out. But let's join Kelly today.
It's this word, this idea that I want you to get this morning, and it's really, really simple, but it's really, really complex. In fact, it's really, really difficult for us to live out, and it's this word, different. Listen, this week we've been, just immersed in this theme and this concept of just what a renegade looks like, of being sold out for Jesus. Yesterday we talked about, we're going to walk through some of these statements of Jesus and what I like to just call this red letter rebel, right? This guy, Jesus, who even in the way he introduced himself to humanity in the earthly form was rebellious. It was a renegade. It was a rogue move in how the world perceived the Son of God. And then the statements that followed upon his arrival was shocking to the core of people. And I'm just telling you, he was different. His message was different. And his calling, like we talked about yesterday to us, to say, listen, come follow me, it was different. And from that moment on, every moment of our lives, every day, every step of following Jesus, it ought to look different than the rest of the world. Jesus has called us to look different. If you've ever thumbed through just the pages of the New Testament and even kind of walked through some of the epistles, the smaller books of the Bible, you'd even see just in the very first verse of many of them, the author would give you and I that are Christians, followers of Jesus, kind of different titles. As he would introduce these letters, he would call us things like strangers. Not because he didn't know us, but just that we were strange to the rest of the world. Some of the letters of the New Testament call us literally aliens, right? Not like from, outer space, but literally we're supernatural, coming from a supernatural world, the supernatural life that lives in us. It's like aliens walking around here in the natural world. We are called the called out ones. We are called the holy ones. In other words, the set apart ones. All through the New Testament, those are the titles, and it's all just further to illustrate this concept of being a renegade, a sold out Christian follower of Jesus means that we are to be different. There's no way around it. There's no way that we can casually and still powerfully live out the Christian life without being different. Those two just don't go together. But you know what? I think all of us are in the same boat when we say this. Listen, at a very early and young age, we have been programmed very quickly that different is not always easy, is it? In fact, we're convinced and we are shown at an early age that fitting in is a whole lot safer and more comfortable, isn't it? That if we would just, like to be accepted in a group of people or with a certain person or within a certain community or within a certain culture, to be accepted into that group, the easiest thing would be to just become more and more like that group, right? Use the same language, wear the same clothes, kind of adapt our interests into whatever that group is into, and we could fit in. But the thought of being different, quite honestly, is a little bit terrifying. Let me just explain this for some of you guys who didn't grow up in church like me, because when you hear these concepts sometimes, it's a little bit frightening, like to be different, right? Because some of you are in this room this morning, and you're going, okay, I know what you're thinking. You're talking about being different, and you're just waiting for that moment, and you're like, okay, that's it. Here it is. Here it comes. I knew it all along. Being a Christian means I've got to be weird, right? But that's not what he's talking about. He's not talking about being obnoxious and loud and crazy. He's not talking about doing things for the sake of just shock value. He's not talking about being different so that you draw all the attention upon yourselves. In fact, he's saying that, listen, when the life of Jesus changes our life from the inside out, it's calling us and motivating us and compelling us that we ought to be set apart from the rest of the world, so that Jesus can stand out in our lives. And being set apart means that we think a little bit different, that we make decisions differently, that our actions look a little bit different, that our relationships look different, that our motivations look different, that we're called to be different, set apart. And when you see it, you recognize it, don't you? When you see it in another believer that's sold out for Jesus, it's easy to spot, isn't it? Earlier this past year, I got invited to preach at this men's conference. And it's the first time I've ever done like a men's conference outside of like a student event, which was kind of already a little bit like overwhelming. But it was in, I don't even remember the town, but I flew into Portland, Oregon, like on the other end of the country, and then we drove a couple hours north into this little retreat center, and here we are. It was this one church out of Salem, Oregon, that had this men's ministry, and it wasn't a huge church. I mean, it was a church of maybe about, 1,000 people. I mean, it's a large church, but it wasn't like tens of thousands of people. But here at this 1,000-member church at this men's conference weekend, they had like 250, 270 men at this men's weekend, which is a big deal. And it was all from this one church, and I was so blown away, just, man, how are you getting all this buy-in from all these men? Because can I just say something for free? And all the ladies say amen. There's an absence of real godly men in the church and in the culture today. Can I get an amen, ladies in the house? There's a void. But it was just so shocking. I'm here, and here's all these men, and man, they're just worshiping full tilt, and it was awesome. The band would get up, and they would sing and lead, and these guys are crammed, in a room that really sat about 220, and there's 270 of us in this room, and they're singing, and they had the most horrible voices you could ever. It was like if you could imagine a pirate ship getting saved. That's what it sounded like, right? It was horrible, but it was beautiful, And man, they were so just genuine and so committed and so just getting after it that it was just this sort of unhindered expression. And the men's minister who was there, and I'm just, man, night after night we're there and hanging out, and I was so intrigued. I said, man, tell me your story. Tell me what's going on. How are you getting this? Because here's the thing, what was more unique than just all of these men in the room. Almost every single man that I had talked to was either a drug addict or a recovering drug addict, had been in and out of prison, who had struggled with living on the streets, who had come from a broken home, or who his own family and his own marriage had fallen apart. And here they were coming to this place of just recovery and restoration where Jesus was doing something miraculous in their midst. And I'm talking like dudes that you roll into and without being judgmental or stereotypical, but you know what I'm talking about when you walk across some guys and you're like, bro, I don't want to make eye contact with this guy because he may fold me up like a pretzel. You know what I'm saying? Like just big, burly, hairy, just gnarly looking dudes. Beards that are just down to their waist. Tattoos. Cut off shirts in the northeast part of the country in February. It's 12 degrees and they don't care. And they're just hard dudes on the outside, but tender hearts for Jesus on the inside. Like I'd never seen before. Anyway, and I'm asking this men's minister, I was going, dude, help me understand, how are you reaching all of these people? This is unbelievable what you're doing. This is literally nothing short of miraculous. And I've spoken at different things and been around a lot of groups and a lot of churches, but there's something so unique about this. I'm just telling you, God's moving in a way that I don't even think you completely understand. He goes, here's the deal. All that we do is, we do these recovery programs. We go out into the cities and we minister to these people on the streets. We go to where they're at. And I said, well, what are you doing? And he says, honestly, we're not doing anything special. We're just being Jesus to them. We're loving on them. We're meeting them at their place of need. We're not judging them. And now this men's minister was a guy that was also a recovering addict who had his story and his past. And so he understood what it was like to live like in their shoes. And he said, man, listen, I'm just going to meet them where they're at. And he said, but here's the interesting thing for us. There's several other churches in our city that are doing the same things. And they've got recovery programs and all these things where they're trying to reach people with the gospel. I said, well, what's different about yours? He says, can I just tell you? He goes, we live in a part of the country in this Northeast where marijuana is legal, where every church in our city doesn't have a standard or a conviction on alcohol, and that's one of those things that's moving in our culture further and further away. And he says, we just made the decision we're not going to move on those things. And we don't put it on our banners. We're not being boastful, and we're not being, something that becomes a barrier to somebody, and look at us and what we don't do. He says, no, we just know this. If we want to reach people who are struggling with addictions, who are struggling with that lifestyle, we have to have a standard that we're different. And so we're going to be different. He says, you know what's interesting? He says, I've got people that come to our recovery programs that have gone to some of these other ones, and then they come to ours and they go, man, we hear all the same things that you're teaching is the same things that everybody else is teaching, but there's something different about your life. And it's compelling us that we need to look different. You see, that church, they saw their standards and being different in a culture as an asset, not an obstacle. And I think for many of us, we view being different and set apart and sold out and holy for Jesus as an obstacle to fit in, as an obstacle to connect with people, as an obstacle to be really even fulfilled and happy in life, when Jesus is saying it's an asset. And I'm calling you to be set apart. I'm wanting you to be different. And here's what I want you to see this morning. And we're going to kind of blow through this text in a hurry just for the sake of time. But I want you to see in Matthew chapter 10. This is one of those statements that Jesus lays it out. Just right in our face, the same expectation. Man, I want you to be different. But he uses some words and some language that on the surface is a little bit troubling. It's a little bit frightening. In fact, it's a little bit counterculture. In fact, a lot counterculture. Now, Matthew chapter 10, let me just give you a little bit of the context here. And if you're in verse 6, here's what he's doing. Jesus is giving instructions to his close group of followers, his disciples, because he's preparing them to send them out for the kind of the very first time on their own to go and minister to people without Jesus. And he's training and teaching and coaching them. And in that process, he's telling them, like in verse 6, he says, I want you to go rather to the lost sheep of Israel. Don't go where it's easy. Don't go where everybody else has always gone and done the same things. We're to be different. Go to the people who need the message of the gospel. And as you go, preach this message. The kingdom of heaven is near. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. Freely you've given, freely you receive. And Jesus is preaching this. It's one of those kind of like locker room pep talk moments, right? Before you go out and take the field. And he's like, man, let's go. And in the middle of that, he's giving them instructions. He's giving them inspiration. And then a few verses later, the tone shifts a little bit. And look in verse 34. Here's what he says. He says, don't suppose that I've come to bring peace to the earth. I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. For I've come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against his mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's enemies will be the members of his own household. And anyone who loves his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves his son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who doesn't take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Doesn't that seem like a bizarre time and a bizarre choice of words? I mean, did Jesus really say that? Like, let's go. Man, let's live different. Oh, by the way. And it's in this moment Jesus makes a statement that was shocking, not only just to the rest of the world, but quite honestly, even some of his closest followers. You see, he's telling them more than just what they are to do. He's telling them how they are to believe. It was a heart check. Can I just tell you something? Listen to me, students. Jesus oftentimes through the Gospels, at the moments where the crowds became the biggest, he would make statements like this, and it would thin out and weed out the crowds. It was so weird because it was so different than what you and I would normally do and the culture's accustomed to doing, right? Like the greater our popularity becomes, the more fearful we are to do something to ruin it, right? Like I want to gain more and more followers. I want to gain more and more acknowledgement. But listen to me, students, don't miss this. Look right here. Jesus didn't come to this earth to seek popularity. He came to seek priority. And there is a big, big difference. Listen to me. The goal for you this week is not to get so amped up on Jesus that you go out of this week screaming at the top of your lungs so that Jesus becomes more popular in your city, more popular in your churches. Listen, there's nothing wrong with proclaiming him, and I hope you do that and shout his name out, but the goal and motivation is not the popularity of Jesus, it's the priority of Jesus in your life, in our church, in our culture, in our homes, in our churches. And so Jesus makes a statement here in the middle of just this huge following, and he says, yo, check this out. If you're following me because it's cool, if you're following me because you're waiting to see the next big miraculous sign because more and more people are following, more and more people are curious, you're missing the point. I'm not here for your popularity, and you just go, wow, this was really neat. I'm here because I want you to make me the number one priority in your life. And when you do that, your life is going to look different than the rest of the world. So let's walk through these just real quickly this morning, all right? And here's what I want you to see, all right? Just give you a couple, 3 thoughts this morning, and then we're going to bounce. But if we're to have a life that is changed by Jesus, this sort of renegade faith that looks differently, there ought to be some evidence of this. So let's just kind of use this as a little bit of a sort of an internal spiritual quiz for our lives this morning, all right? Just to say, man, if my life looks different, does it embody any of these evidences? And here's the first one that we would have to embody in our lives of it that looks different for Jesus. And number one is this: we have to count the cost. When we follow Jesus, we have to count the cost. Look back in verse 34. He says this. Jesus says, man, don't suppose that I've come to bring peace to the earth. I didn't come to bring peace, but I came to bring a sword. Now that sounds really weird because you read, verses like in Matthew chapter 5 when Jesus kind of has that Sermon on the Mount moment, right? One of his first things he preached, and he says, blessed are the what? Peacemakers. And now here he's saying, I didn't come to bring peace. I came to bring a sword. Was Jesus contradicting himself? Absolutely not. What Jesus was trying to say here in this moment, what he was trying to help us to understand is he wasn't talking about internal peace. He said, I didn't come to bring peace but a sword. He was saying, listen, I didn't come to fix all of your external problems without internal change. I didn't come just so that your life could be, happy and easy and comfortable. Listen to me. Jesus offers peace in our hearts. Jesus offers peace in the deepest, darkest, hardest, most troubled portions of our soul. He offers peace, and that was his motive of coming. He says, I want to change you from the inside out. I want to offer you peace when you follow me, even when nothing else on the outside is peaceful. But you see, the people here were saying, listen, that's fine. That's fine. Let's keep all this Jesus stuff. Let's keep all this religious stuff on the surface where it's safe. Hey, Jesus, fix my relationships. Hey, Jesus, fix this government that's just kind of real oppressive and doesn't allow for any upward mobility. God, fix all my financial problems. God, fix all the stuff going on in my home and my family. God, fix all the things so that I can have more stuff, so that I can be more about me, so that I can be more comfortable. And Jesus going, no, I didn't come for that kind of peace. I didn't come for that. I came to call you out to be different. Listen to me, and this is a whole nother talk for a whole nother time, but I think one of the greatest enemies to Christianity today is comfort. Man, we so long to be comfortable, and Jesus says, man, I didn't come for that kind of external peace. Now, is that a byproduct, and sometimes there's things that happen and God blesses you externally? Absolutely. He says, but I came to bring peace on the inside, even when it's hard. And listen to me, following Jesus isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. And sometimes it's hard. I remember I told you I didn't grow up in a church, and I came to know Jesus at the age of 16. A friend of mine shared the gospel with me right before my junior year of high school, and I trusted Jesus, and man, God just started changing me on the inside out. And I transferred to this Christian school my last 2 years of high school. It was the same school where my buddy was going, the same buddy that had led me to the Lord. And so I thought, man, let me go there. I'll go hang out with him. I'll play baseball there. I knew the coach. And I spent 2 years there. And then my freshman year of college, I spent a year of junior college ball in Tampa. And then I went to Liberty after my freshman year. But my freshman year of college, I went to Hillsborough Community College right here in Tampa. And I went because there was just a lot of transition in my family at that time, and I felt like I needed to stay in town, and so I did. But here's the thing. It was the first time for me growing up. I'd grown up in public school, grown up not a church guy, but it was the first time being really fully back immersed in a public school, lost, totally saturated, apart from God environment, but now doing it as a Christian. And so I'm here at this community college my freshman year, and I'm on the baseball team with these guys, and it was evident, man. It was me and a buddy of mine that transferred in, or came in that first year, and he was the only other guy that I knew that was a Christian on the team. And within the first 6-8 weeks, he started hanging out and partying with all the other guys on the team and literally abandoned me and what looked like abandoned his faith. To the point I questioned and wondered, did he even have faith in Jesus? Because there was no evidence of it from that moment on. And I never felt more alone in my life than that moment. Still a brand new Christian, doing what I felt like God called me to do. And can I just tell you, it was so hard. My wife, who at the time we were dating, she was at Florida State, and I remember calling her, and in Tallahassee, and I was in Tampa, and I remember we would go on road trips, and it was just crazy. We would go on road trips to play games, and there would be carloads of girls that would follow the bus with drugs and alcohol so that after the games, the guys on the team can party in the hotels all night. And there was moments I would literally have to leave my hotel room because I didn't know what was going to happen with the guy that I would happen to be paired with in room. It was just, for a guy that was a Christian and trying to live right and trying to live different, man, it was so difficult. To the point I felt so alone that I remember calling Tara in Tallahassee and just telling her, hey, listen, I know God's called me here. I know that I'm on scholarship here, but I think I'm just going to quit. I'm done. I just cannot do this. And she said, no, you just keep being faithful, keep being faithful. I remember doing the best I could do when I would get invited to hang out with guys. I would try to say, well, listen, I'm not going to hang out on your terms because y'all are crazy, but I'll hang out on our terms. And so I would try to invite them in to do stuff that was, not crazy and weird. And so we started building relationships, and I wasn't really totally a part of that crowd because they knew I wasn't going to do what they did. But here's what I came to discover. They respected my stance was different, even though I wasn't totally in on everything they did. And by the end of that first semester, one of the guys on the team was a sophomore. He had been there his freshman year. He was one of our best pitchers. He was drafted out of high school. He was about to be drafted again after his sophomore year, and partying with a bunch of the guys on the team late one night, about 3 a.m, drives himself home, passes out behind the wheel, hits the telephone pole, and kills himself in the middle of the night. And the next morning, our team, awakens to the news of this, and they fall apart. And I went in that moment from being the guy sort of on the fringe and feeling like the outcast because I knew that Jesus had made a difference in my life, and I wanted to live different, but still engage in the world in the best way I could and to reach the world for Jesus. And in that moment, I got more phone calls than ever before on that team, because guys were searching for answers, and they had no idea who to call or to ask. We birthed Bible studies out of that moment. 2 guys on the team that I had no idea were Jesus followers until that moment finally got the nerve up to step up and go, hey, I follow Jesus too. Will you help me to live different? And God started something powerfully in that midst. But can I just tell you, it was birthed sometimes out of pain. I believe this, that oftentimes in our lives, the things that we desire most in the deepest parts of our heart are found on the other side of the things that we dread the most. And we have to be willing to push through the things that we dread to get to ultimately what we desire and the desires that God's birthed in us. And sometimes it means doing things that are difficult and not always easy, right? I love this scene. It's one of my favorite scenes of any movie of any time. It's on like every weekend. A League of Their Own, if you've ever seen it, it's kind of based on the true story of the women's professional baseball team. And during World War II, all the men go off to war and they start. And it's at the end of the movie. Tom Hanks is the coach of the team, right? And their best player, her husband, comes home from work because he gets injured, and she's contemplating and ultimately makes the decision that she's going to quit the team right before the championship game and go off with her husband. It's too much. She's overwhelmed, and Tom Hanks meets her out in the driveway before the team's getting on the bus, and she's about to get in the car with her husband and leave the team. And he's like, "What are you doing? Where are you going?" And she makes this statement. She said, "It's just gotten too hard." And he looks at her and he says, "It's supposed to be hard. If it wasn't hard, everybody would do it." And he says this is the greatest line. He goes, "It's the hard that makes it great." Listen to me, students. It's the hard parts of stepping up, stepping out, living different that makes the life of following Jesus great. It's getting up in the mornings when you don't have a counselor or a parent telling you to, "Hey, have you read your Bible today?" and losing a little extra sleep to spend time with the King of the universe that makes it great. It's saying no to the crowd that's going to do something that you know is not right, to avoid, even in the fear of feeling left out and feeling lonely or feeling judged, that makes it great when you're loved and respected on levels that the world can't even offer. And Jesus says, "Listen, I'm with you, and I'm going to be faithful even when you don't see it." He says it's challenging. And watch this. Jesus says, "Man, I didn't come to bring peace, all this externally, but I came to bring a sword." You know what we find the sword in the Bible? He's talking about the Bible, right? I came to bring truth. Jesus came to bring truth to your life. And sometimes truth can sting. Sometimes truth, man, it changes. Sometimes truth, man, it can even be offensive in the culture, but man, truth can also protect. And he says, "Listen, man, I didn't come for you to have all the problems always fixed on the outside. I came to give you peace on the inside." And here's the question, man, have you been willing to count the cost in your life? Because it's going to cost you something. Here's the question for you this morning, real simple. When's the last time your faith in Jesus has cost you something? Because it will. Not because God's out to punish you or to make you lack, but because he wants you to experience more of him. And there's a cost. Here's the second one. This statement's even almost more bizarre as you read this, but the second one is, man, the evidence of that renegade life of Jesus is we've got to count the cost. Number two is that we have to compare our love. You've got to compare your love. Watch this in verse 35. He says, For I didn't come to bring peace but a sword. And he says, verse 35, "For I've come to turn man against his father and daughter against his mother." I've turned daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's enemies will be the members of their own household. This is a crazy statement because, I mean, people are reading this like, Jesus, what? Like, did you come to like create all these issues? And listen to me, students, Jesus didn't come because he's against the family, right? We know that. Jesus wasn't against the family, and Jesus isn't saying that we shouldn't love people, but he was saying this: listen, as you evaluate your life, what he really was asking, is there anything and anyone that you love more than me? In fact, when you love me with everything in you, it almost looks as if it looks like you hate everything else. Not because you hate everything else, but because your love and your devotion for me is so strong, it's so committed, it's so elevated. In comparison, it looks like you hate the rest of the world. He says, man, you got to compare your love. You got to compare the things that Jesus is saying, listen, that we devote all of our time and energy to. Compare it to how much you love Jesus. I read a study that says this: the average teenager spends between like 30 and 40 hours a week of screen time, right? And some of us adults, we're right there with y'all. You know what I'm saying? Like, and we get sucked into like, the social media universe, right? And like an hour goes by and we go, what did I just do with my life, right? And we get sucked into the world of like gaming and all kinds of stuff, and we'll spend hours and hours of time, and it's crazy. And here's the thing, man, listen, we can spend 30 to 40 hours a week on screen time, and we'll spend less than an hour a week in the Word of God or praying, and we hardly miss that. We can get devastated if we have to miss one ball game, but we can be tired and overwhelmed and have too much homework, and it's no problem for us to sleep in and just give church a pass, right? he says, listen, you got to compare your love. And we can't go minutes without checking our cell phone, but we can go days and weeks and months without asking the God of the universe to speak to our hearts through his word. He says, man, you got to compare your love. It's more than that. And then we wonder why our spiritual lives feel sometimes just defeated, and it feels pointless and it feels overwhelming. And Jesus is saying, hey, listen, let's just add up all that you are demonstrating that you love more than me. You want to be a renegade for Jesus, man, you got to love Jesus with everything in you. You got to say, Jesus, I'm all in. Jesus, I'm willing to go for it. Jesus' rebellion, this renegade spirit was about total commitment. He says, I'm all in. Here's the last one and we'll go. He says, man, number 3 is this. You want evidence of that, just that renegade spirit, you got to choose the cross. You got to be willing to choose the cross in your life. Verse 38, watch this. He says, and if anyone does not take up his cross and follow me, he's not worthy of me. Anyone who finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake, they are going to find it. Can I tell you something? Jesus is never going to ask you to do something that he wasn't willing to do himself. He says, man, I'm giving everything. I'm giving everything to this cause. This wasn't some religious movement. This wasn't some new way of thinking. This wasn't some philosophical thing that you ought to just kind of memorize. He says, listen, this was a rebellion against the culture of the world and the mindset of even religious teachers. It says there's something greater, there's someone greater, and he's offering something greater when you give your life to Jesus, and it changes everything. He says, you got to be willing to die to some things. He says, man, choose the cross. Choose the cross. Can I just tell you, without getting a whole lot of time this morning on it, but a cross, man, if you study just, man, history, it was a horrible device. I mean, like the Romans that created this thing, they perfected just the art of torture. I mean, trial and error and lots of different methods, and one of the most effective and devastating methods of torture and pain and destruction, it was this method of just a simple wooden cross. Here's the thing. They were crafted for individuals. There wasn't this like cross factory that they just had them stockpiled. They crafted it for you. When you were to be hung on a cross, man, they measured it, they crafted it, they perfected it to fit you. In other words, listen, when Jesus says, man, if you take up your cross, man, if you're not willing to do that, you're not worthy to follow after me. He says, listen, a cross is a very personal thing. It's crafted for you. And Jesus says, listen, nobody else can do this for you but you. In other words, I have to be willing to say, Jesus, what can I lay down to be sold out for you? It's personal. Man, bearing a cross and carrying a cross, it was not only a personal thing, it was a public thing. But when Jesus would carry that thing through the streets, everybody saw it. It wasn't something that was done in the shadows. It was something that affected, man, everybody's view of you. And he says, man, listen, it's going to cost you. It's something public. And it's also something that's just painful. And we have to make the choice every single day, every single moment. Jesus, will I choose you? Will I choose the cross, or will I choose self? Will I choose you, or will I choose self? What I so love about this theme in this week, and what we've already seen demonstrated just in the last, 36 hours that you guys have been to camp, is that life change has already taken place in many of you. Eternal life change. And it was met when you met the cross. When you came to the place that says, listen, not my will, but your will. When you came to the place and says, not my life, but your life. When you came to the place and says, listen, no longer is it going to be about me, and Jesus, it needs to be about you. I was at this event one time, and I remember listening, this woman came out on stage, and she's a very famous Christian author and speaker, has written dozens of books and huge following, and somebody was interviewing her and asked her this question, and they simply said this, hey, Like, what's the legacy that you hope to leave behind? Kind of a valid question, right? I mean, she's doing all these great things, influencing so many people for the gospel's sake. And they said, man, what's the legacy that you hope to leave behind? And the answer she gave was just, man, it was so spot on. And here's what she said. She said, quite honestly, the legacy that I leave behind hopefully has nothing to do with me. She says, because what Jesus has called me to and the life that he's called me to live, this sort of rebellious, renegade Christian life, those weren't her words, but it was that concept because it really had nothing to do with my legacy. In fact, and she went on and quote this verse, and she says, man, when Jesus called me, he says, I'm not worthy of him unless I'm willing to pick up the cross and follow after him. And here's what she said. She says, man, I have this image in my mind that a legacy is this kind of idea that every step that I take in life, every move I make to advance and to accomplish and to attain and moving forward, it leaves these sort of footprints trail behind me that everybody could see and everybody can even follow in and say, man, that's the legacy. And for many of us, that's the way we live, right? God, I want to leave this legacy behind me. I want to leave this just indention behind me that people can see and follow and know and acknowledge. Man, this was a life well lived. And she says, but you know what? I lived my life that way for a long, long time until I really understood this verse, that if I am to pick up my cross and carry it, that every footprint that I take and leave behind is going to be covered by the cross that I drag behind me. She said, really, the legacy has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with the cross of Jesus. Listen to me. This isn't easy text, but you know what? Christianity is it's not for the ones who want it comfortable. Not for the ones who want it easy. It's for the ones who want their life to be purposed, to be fulfilling, to be meaningful, to produce everlasting change in the lives around them. And it says, listen, you got to pick up the cross and leave a legacy that has nothing to do with you. And when you do, it means surrender to yourself, to your ways, to your will. And it's a daily process that starts on the inside out. Cool? Let me pray for you and we'll go. King Jesus, sometimes when we read these passages, Jesus, it strikes really at the core of our pride. It strikes to the heart of so much that is kind of inside of our flesh and that's born into our minds from culture that means I've got to make something of me. And what I want matters and what I feel is ultimate. And while it's hard to swallow sometimes, releasing and dropping our pride, Jesus, we could also look at passages like that in a totally different light. And that means simply this. You didn't call us to be great. You didn't ask us to be great before we came to you. In fact, you said, the greatest things I can do in you and through you is when you empty yourself and create space for me to do something powerful. God, I can think of nothing more counterculture, nothing more just rebellious and renegade to the culture of this world than if teenagers, like a room full of this, would make decisions to say, hey, listen, my life is bigger than me because I serve a God that's over all. And so I'm going to make every day and every decision based on the fact and the reality that I'm living under the greatness and the glory of the authority of God. And Jesus can do whatever he wants with my life because I trust him. So I'm choosing the cross. I'm counting the cost, and I'm going to compare every love that I have for everything else up against my love for you, Jesus, because your love for me is unmatched. So for that, we say thank you. And we ask you to bless us today, but also live in light of the supernatural today. In Jesus' great name, and everybody say it. Amen. Amen.
Today's call that Kelly brings to us is a hard one. He calls us to count the cost. He encourages us with the line, Jesus didn't come for popularity, but for priority. Let's be transparent. That's really, really hard. It's tough sometimes. It's hard to go against the flow that everybody else is going in. And I don't know about you, but growing up in high school, I had a lot of Christian friends that even were going in the wrong direction. So it was hard for me to say, no, wait a second, hold up. We should go over here. This is what Jesus is calling us to do. And to be honest with you guys, there was a lot of times I just went right along with what everybody else was doing and what everybody else was saying. I like how Kelly said this. It's supposed to be hard. It's the hard things that make it great. So the question is, when is the last time that your faith cost you something? When's the last time that you said, Lord, I'm going to trust you so much that I'm willing for my faith to cost me this right here? Think about it. Ask yourself, is your faith costing you anything? Kelly then asks this question, what is my time devoted to? You see, he made the assumption that I think is correct, that what we give our time to displays what we love and value the most. He said that the cross was purposed for pain, it was crafted for individuals, and it was more public than personal. But at the end, Jesus knew that not only was this the hard choice, but it was the good choice. And so, prior to his death, he looked at his disciples saying, hey, if any of you is going to follow me, it's going to cost you something. So let me ask you the question again. What is following Christ costing you? I would ask that if it's not something that you got to, think about and value and evaluate and say, man, do I want to give this? Does it really matter to you? It's a tough question to ask. It's a tough question to answer. But I believe that it's a good one because that calls us into a deeper, closer walk with our teacher, with our leader, with Jesus Christ. Thanks for pressing pause today. Let's go reach the world with Christ. I didn't like that at all.
Didn't like what?
The whole thing.
Really?
No, you think it was fine?
I mean, I thought it sounded good.
Okay. All right.
But that's up to you. I mean,
No. You're fine.
but